Hi, everybody. Today's November 1st, 2023, and I'm honored to have with me Ron Coleman. It's pronounced Ron Coleman. He's an attorney, very bright guy, and I have been following a lot of his thoughts and mental escapades on X, twitter.com, and you should too, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And Tell us what's top of mind. I heard there was something that happened in the Middle East recently.
Yeah, that's been pretty dominant. Certainly, you mentioned X, Twitter. That has dominated my social media activity, and it's been a bit of a distraction. But that's what happened when life comes at you hard.
Mhm.
To say that it's a distraction, talking about life and death matters, and a systematic inversion of morality taking place before your very eyes. It's a pretty astonishing experience, and to say, as I say, it's not a background phenomenon. It's reality, and for a lot of people that we know and a lot of people that we care about, it's pretty distressing and in some cases tragic.
And it doesn't stop. It seems that there was the nuclear bomb came about in the 40s, and then there was the Cold War. The Cold War, there was a threat of mutual destruction. So we had country combatants, and they would act as state actors, and they were mutually deterred, as it were, at a certain point when the adversaries each had a full holster with nuclear bombs and whatnot. But we're seeing a different kind of war, kind of a very asymmetric war that really is a demographic war, I think, and really perhaps best exemplified by I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the capital of Dagestan, but it's something like Manachkala, whatever, Dagestan, where I gather, it was well advertised, and a flight from Israel arrived, and why not lynch, or whatever the Arabic word or Dagestani word would be for that. Can you tell us a little bit what is the landscape of this war? It's not being fought with nuclear weapons. It's being fought with the anagram unclear weapons.
Yeah, well, unclear nuclear. Yeah, it is unclear. I'm less concerned with demographics than I am with or the demographics in Dagestan than I am with the demographics on our university campuses in the cities, in what were once the great cities of Europe. For all their failures, these were the places that our culture historically has had significant attachments to. And now these are places where, by and large, a barbaric moral code reigns. And the people who have allowed it to happen, invited it to happen, and for all practical purposes are encouraging it to continue happening. And there is sort of to the extent you want to talk about demographics, this is happening in parts of the United States as well. I mean, there's been a radical change in the makeup of the sociological, ethnic, yes, moral, religious, and worldview perspectives of places like Minnesota, major cities in the United States, Michigan. Yeah, I mean, these are phenomenal changes, and I'm a little bit reluctant to say people who come here need to assimilate, because actually I think assimilation, as an Orthodox Jew, I think assimilation was harmful to Jewish survival in the United States. But there is a level of assimilation that is necessary, and that's assimilation to basic shared values, recognition and respect for democracy and the rule of law, nonviolence. There were some Jews who came to this country who did not assimilate. yes, there were religious Jews who did not assimilate, although the vast majority of them did. But there were also Jews who couldn't make it, whether it was because of discrimination or because of their own limitations, and became gangsters and criminals. They ultimately are not a there's no such sector anymore. The world of Jewish gangsters is not really a thing. There was a world of also non-assimilating Jews who became communists, and unfortunately, they survived in many cases, had offspring. Some of them were caught and electrocuted for their crimes, but not nearly enough. What these people did when they came to this country was, just, besides disgracing the Jewish people and besides demonstrating a very similar version of that ingratitude that we see on display in these pro-Hamas demonstrations around the country, is a form of moral inversion, a failure to acknowledge that in the United States, again, you can be a communist, but you can't spy for the communists. I mean, I do think that being a communist is a form of moral treason, but it is not technically treason. Being a spy, being a traitor, that is treason, and the actions of those people have not only harmed the United States, but they harmed the Jews. And in those days, however, American society made it clear that this sort of conduct will not be tolerated. And it was wrong to be a spy. It was wrong to be a traitor. It was wrong to be a fellow traveler. It was wrong to be a communist. It was wrong to be a gangster. And actions were taken. Were enough actions taken? Probably not. Were enough crimes prevented? Probably not. But at least the consensus of morality was clear, and that was from the top down. Today, there is no moral center, and there's no better example of this than what's going on the college campuses. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what happened at Harvard. I think it was just only yesterday, and one of the big perpetrators of that attack on Israeli students, a physical and verbal attack on Israeli students, at Harvard, was apparently an editor on the Harvard Law Review. What's going to be with us? I saw my wife, Jane Coleman, the writer for Illegal Insurrection, brought to my attention a very incisive article by the always reliable Victor David Hansen, one of the few people at National Review still worth reading. And one of the excerpt that she chose was to put into a tweet was, but they will still calibrate, talking about the university presidents, responding to the removal of certain Jewish donors' support for Harvard and the like. But they will still calibrate whether such funding losses will be more than offset by even more billions of dollars pouring in from the Middle East on news of universities near institutionalized anti-Semitism and support for Hamas. And I also plucked a quote from that, which was, "No college president wishes to concede that the fusion of its guest students from the Middle East and its DEI industry is at the heart of visceral hatred of Jews." I had the privilege of attending one of the great universities in one of the great times for that university as an undergraduate, Princeton University. It was truly an atmosphere of intellectual, inquiry, and was there a certain amount of political correctness? There was. I remember in particular, sponsoring an event on behalf of a conservative organization, and those And the flyers for my event were pulled down throughout the entire campus. But you know what? That's trivial. That happens. This was the mid-'80s. Now, Princeton has become one of the most intolerant campuses in the United States, and it's really a shame. And guess what? I said this on Tim Pool a couple last week. I'll say it here too. To some extent, I blame the Jews. Many of these institutions are led by Jewish presidents and Jewish deans, or at least deans with some Jewish heritage, Jewish last names. And in their misapplied conception of what their moral duty in this world is, they think that tolerating intolerance is some kind of mitzvah, so to speak, some kind of what they call tikkun olam. It's not. It's the exact opposite.
A blessing, healing the world.
Right. It's the exact opposite. They're not repairing the world. This is literally what destroys the world. And it is just it's absolutely unthinkable to send your child, and to call 18-year-olds children is one of the preposterous lies about higher education in this country. What colleges have done for generations now has been to arrest adolescents, and even to retard adolescence. That is retard growth that has already taken place towards adulthood. College is not there are some people who are, overcome that and make the most of their college years. But in any event, it's a real moral crisis. It's systemic. It's across the entire country. The fact that some Jewish donors who are influential, Jews are successful, Jews do have money, Jews are high achievers, so they do have some influence. But the extent to which it has become acceptable to come out of the work and be explicitly anti-Semitic and say, well, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Israeli, and here's why. I'm anti-Zionist, and here's why all Zionists control the world. Here's why all Zionists control the international money supply. And here's why all Zionists poison the wells. If you're just going to repeat classic anti-Semitic tropes and just use the word Zionist instead of Jews, you really aren't fooling anyone, and no one should be fooled. But yeah, this is a pretty it's a pretty stunning moment, and a lot of people of good faith. I will tell you that I'm speaking to you from Palm Beach, Florida today. I'm attending an event here, and in the airport in Newark yesterday when I flew in, just a total random Caucasian-American woman, blonde-haired lady, came up to me, seeing my obvious. If my face didn't say it, I guess if I didn't wear a yarmulke, she couldn't just look at me and say, wow, you're a really Jewish-looking guy, and I want to give you my blessing. Although it wouldn't be that hard. It would probably be offensive. But because I kind of look like a rabbi, she just stopped to me in the terminal and said, "Sir, God bless you. God bless you." And I get a lot of messages like that. I get a lot of messages on social media, and I'm very active on Twitter, X, and the overwhelming personal messages that I've gotten, 99%, have been from friends, many of whom are people that I have never interacted with. Just asking how I am. How's my family? Is everyone okay? Are we worried? Are you and your family doing all right? This must be really hard on you. And I'm very grateful for these expressions of concern and affection and support. Although when I have the time to really answer, I often remind people that growing up in a survivor family, and being now, in my 60s, I'm old enough and having a background appropriate enough to know that this is, in fact, the typical experience of Jews in the world, not the previous half century or so or let's say 2 generations of relative peace and support. this is more like what our history shows us. And if that shocks some Jewish people into reassessing what it means to them to be Jewish and what they want to do about being Jewish, and hopefully turns it in a positive way, then maybe that's something positive that can come out of this. I'm not, I don't have the sufficient shoulders to say, oh, this is all for the best. I mean, everything God does for a reason. Everything God allows to happen, He allows to happen for a reason. But this is pretty heavy business.
There's a lot to parse there. I make kind of an equation between Hamas and ISIS, at least as far as their methodology, their interests, and so forth. And I find that I guess at the very least hypocrisy that all the people who didn't show much concern and didn't group in the streets when ISIS was acting out in kind of rump state Iraq or bits of Syria, or when they do various massacres in Nigeria, when I say ISIS, various Boko Haram, all the offshoots, they're here and there, and so forth. Tunisia, you name it. I mean, it's all these places, and the victims are myriad, and oftentimes Muslim. And when the Taliban, did X, Y, and Z, I guess people are upset. They're not really that upset when they act against their own women in Afghanistan and so forth. And it's just kind of an oddity to me that that now it's a problem. And I'm wondering what's the no pun intended, what's the genesis of that? And does it really come down to, in my view, it comes down to the fact that not all Muslims are violent, but there's a certain amount of violence in the world that today that is propagated and promoted and part of of the more vigorous part of Islam, with which many others will not want to argue. And I think we see the same thing with BLM and whatnot. My underlying feeling is that people disdain terrorism, but terrorism works. And based on the kind of the numbers, I don't know, 1.5 billion. I'm not sure what the number of Islamic adherents there are on Earth versus, I don't know, 10 million or something like that, whatever the number is, Jews. People just kind of reading the tea leaves, reading the numbers, or whatever the word is, reading the room.
You're asking me if I think they're reading the room. What are they reading in the room, you think?
Well, they're reading the room that, Ilhan Omar got elected in Minneapolis. That's not the Minneapolis I knew as a kid.
Right.
I didn't grow up there, but it was just kind of a Swedish German heritage place, and Rashida Tlaib, she's Palestinian, Arab origin, whatever. There's a different flow. I mean, the squad is being elected, and there's a demographic pull to politics. People celebrated LaGuardia, I guess, and there's various tides, and people celebrate Obama, and they celebrate, a lot of based on ethnic pull. And reading the room is like, well, you guys, sure, you got a big part in maybe the Bible and history and the Nobel Prize for science and whatnot, but what have you done for us lately, and what are you going to do for us in the future? You got this little tiny country, fine, whatever. We don't really care. The numbers are such that many countries have roiling Islamic factions. Whether it's Russia, potentially China. I don't think there's a country on earth without this issue at hand.
But China and Russia, notwithstanding what happened in Dagestan, which I frankly probably took, I don't think anybody was ready for that. I mean, that seems to have just been kind of a freaky thing. I don't really know what the Russian government's going to do about it, but I don't, putting Europe aside, I don't think Russia or China is interested, when you say reading the room, in saying, I guess we better go with the flow and lie down for an Islamic takeover. I think that what happened in what the Chinese have been doing systematically to the talk about words I don't know how to pronounce properly. The Uyghur right Muslims is to some extent an attempt by them to repress Islam in China. They're not interested in any alternate ideology or social grouping that has connections beyond China. And similarly, what the Russians had their own civil war against the Muslims in Chechnya, right? The thing about the Eastern Europeans and to some extent the Chinese is they're unapologetic in saying we have an ethnic heritage. And let's put Ukraine and Russia aside. That's simply doesn't fit into this discussion. We have an ethnic heritage, and we're open to a much more democratic and pluralistic form of government than you've seen in this part of the world, our part of the world, in your entire lives, and for any history before that. But we're Hungary, we're Poland, we're Russia. We're not going to become Lundistan. We're not going to let our countries become overwhelmed demographically by an element that is not only strange to us, but hostile to who and what we are. We have simply not, and when I say we, I include myself. We have simply not grappled with what that means for the United States, because we had this, confidence that people would come to America and become Americans, and you could retain a sort of, ethnic identification. And as I said, you might lose something in the assimilation. And again, what did Irish people lose by assimilating? If you're Catholic, you're still Catholic. What did Italians lose? If you're, again, there are ethnic ties, and those add richness to life. But for Jews, you have the religious component, and it's more complicated. But nonetheless, there has been this requirement that you accept democratic and traditional moral norms. And that has been abandoned with respect to the forced immigration, the immigration that has been forced on Americans by one political party and by one branch of government, which is the judiciary. The judiciary has basically allowed this, vast amount of illegal immigration to take place and made it impossible for the other branches of the government to do anything about it, even in those times when they wanted to.
Right.
And now we're faced with that demographic fait accompli that we must grapple with. And so far, very few institutions are succeeding at that task.
So do you see this as a passing phase? When the ADD world kind of moves beyond this concept onto something else, that they're onto something else?
That's a great question. I think there is a widespread realization here that this is not one of those things. That we have seen the enemy, and it is us, in the sense that this is a large percentage of our population, that a very substantial portion of institutions that are very important to us, not only because of our individual affiliations with them, but because we as a nation take pride in them. It has always been a great matter of pride for Americans to be the home of Harvard and Stanford and Princeton and Yale, that we are the place that everyone in the world wants to have their children educated, and we're the leading scholars in the world look for the best in education. We have pumped money into these institutions. They are so wealthy that they don't really need anything from anyone anymore. I mean, even if they don't get billions of dollars from these various corrupt Middle Eastern dictatorships, they have so many tens or more of billions of dollars in the leading schools in their endowments. They can go a very, very long time without needing cash, although they never stop asking for it. I mean, somebody tweeted something to the extent that this fellow Griffith had expressed wonder. He had just apparently given $300 million to Harvard. And he was astonished at what Harvard was allowing to take place on its campus. I don't understand how somebody with that kind of money can be so morally blind as to think that the best thing he can do with his $300 million is give it to a university with virtually limitless multi-billion-dollar endowment. There are, the change you can make and the good you can do in the world, even if you want it to be in education, with $300 million to give it to the richest school in the world, that national sort of vanity and that national sort of pride taken to its logical personalized extreme, which is why I want to have a school with my name on it. I went to Northwestern University School of Law. It's now called the Pritzker Northwestern School of Law. That's disgusting. Northwestern isn't a school that needs the Pritzker's name on it. They wanted a giant, big, fat donation from the Pritzkers, and they got it. And the Pritzkers apparently have what they've done with their money in terms of the trans pseudoscience and anti-science business is mind-boggling. But for a school like Northwestern, that has been one of the 15 top 10 schools in the country for the last couple of generations, to just sell its naming rights like a football stadium, this is to some extent tied in with money and tied in with influence. And and in the post-war era, academics began to write on the topic of how America was a classless society. Your what we call in Yiddish, your yichus, your heritage, your what's the word? What is it called? What that an animal has? No. Your it's a D word. You're just your the quality of your background. How am I forgetting the word? You got to edit this.
Your DNA, your lineage.
No, you're just the quality of your descendants. It's what is it called? Your breeding, whatever it's called.
Okay.
So you don't have these social classes. You don't have a landed gentry.
Right.
What you have is wealth. Wealth determines class in the United States. And we shrugged our shoulders at that. And we said, well, okay, but at least that's sort of a meritocracy. And then what we saw beginning in the last 20 or 30 years was that institutions are captured by wealth, and they sell their values for wealth. And wealth is an extraordinarily powerful driver of change. And institutions that once took great pride in their standards began to respond to things like government money and donor money and BlackRock money, and sold out not only their names but their standards of excellence and their standards of performance and their ethical standards, and this is the mess that we have now. So I think there is a wide realization, going back to your question, which was about 10 minutes ago, but you invited Ron Coleman on. That's the kind of thing that'll happen. talk about an ADD brain. I don't know how many windows I've opened since I first started answering your question, but
No,
the
that's
answer.
actually genuine discourse.
So I do think that the answer to the question is, I think a lot more people than you would necessarily think to just look at the headlines. A lot more people like the lady in the airport and the people who send me the DMs are aware that something has been lost and something more is at risk, and that there is a silent majority in this country that, without being in any way um, ideological, any meaningful way ideological, or much less theocratic, wants to see a return to traditional values that in a society that Muslims can share in, but on the condition that they do so on the same basis that our ancestors shared in when they came to this country, which was respect for law, respect for nonviolence, and uh, political systems that operate under a rule of law that we have inherited and that are a valuable heritage of the American people. Part of that also includes, and this is where the BLM part of it ties in, the end, and I think to some extent this Hamas and Israel stuff helps put a little bit of a sharper point on it. The end of group guilt, and whether accepting group guilt on oneself. I'm white, and therefore, well, first of all, I'm, ask any white supremacist, notwithstanding my considerable pallor. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, so that makes me a Jew, and that makes me not white. Of course, I'm white, but the point is, the idea that people are going around saying, "Well, I'm a white person, and I need to request forgiveness from people of color," that's, besides being nonsense. Certainly, the idea that anyone can approach me and demand that I, a first generation American, coming from nothing and nowhere, have to give obeisance or reparations to someone for crimes committed by others generations ago. The whole idea, it's not so different from you're a Jew and therefore you're a Zionist, and therefore you're not allowed to support or express support for Jews, or even you have to renounce your heritage or your identification. That's all got to go out the window. Everyone's an American in America. We've got a worldwide problem, but I can't fix France. I can't fix the UK. I certainly can't fix Dagestan or Blondistan. Good one, right?
I got that. Yeah, I got that. I grew up in Riverdale, and so that was the
Archie and Veronica Stan.
Right. So there's actually there's a TV show, Riverdale. I never got to see it, but I did live there. But I never saw Dagwood or anybody.
Dagwood or Blondie. But in any event, I do think, I think that we are facing a reckoning, and I think that this is not going to be something that's a passing fad. True and serious and frightening, and I use that word, rhetorically. I'm not really frightened. My wife would probably be happy if I would sometimes be a little more frightened, but I'm kind of stupid that way. But worrying faults in the geology of our national continent. We need to really reckon with it. And, it would be great if we had the leadership capable of doing that today. I don't know if such a leader ever existed. I mean, I think you would need a man with the courage of an Abraham Lincoln, and he did not succeed. He did not succeed in healing the divisions. He exacerbated them to a large extent. He did make the moral reckoning, but it was not sustainable. And and of course, neither was his life. I don't think you can look to models of the great presidents that we learned about in history, because these times, I think, are immensely more challenging. The moral consensus, the civic consensus is gone. And I don't know what kind of burnout we're going to need to achieve before it gets better. I simply don't know. But I do think we're reckoning with it now in a way that we weren't a month ago, and that we will still be in another month.
So I'm asking the Jewish guy, is the United States historically a Christian country? Are the ethics and morals, everyone says the Judeo-Christian tradition. Is it, is there, you don't want to have a religious test, but is the thread of Islam, the thread, not the threat, of Islam potentially concurrent with, or can one intertwine the two? Or is there kind of a necessity of theocracy in order to follow the Muslim tradition? It's not to say that every country with Islam is Iran or Saudi, whatever. But if you ask people where they want to travel to, if the world's a quiet place, I think most people say Italy, France, whatever. At least these images of those places. I have very few people, except who want to visit relatives, who will go to Iran. And even then, probably not. Few Iranian friends I have will never go back. And there are very few places that have, the Islamic Republic of in front of their names or near their names that people will travel to. Even our own Ilhan Omar seems not to like the U.S. very much, but even though I guess her dad was kind of a Somali guerrilla consultant at the very least. She has no intention of going back, and that doesn't seem to be on the travel list, even though it's temperate, tropical, has oceanfront property, etc. What's the proposition, and is there some kind of compact that we can reach with reasonable accord? I think you kind of hinted at it earlier, but how does it actually get affected? Can it?
So I think we're simply incapable of, whether you and I might agree that, and Michael Knowles is someone I've discussed this with a couple of times also, and Yoram Hazoni and I, it would be easy for us to sit down and agree with a change in paradigm and what that might look like. But that's a long way from making it possible. I don't think it's possible. So what is possible? I do think that what I hinted at before, as you just mentioned, is the model. Is that yes, we can continue. You can be a Muslim, and you can have whatever views you like, and you can express them, but your conduct must adhere to our norms, to our Anglo-Saxon Judeo-Christian norms. Is it really Judeo-Christian? Listen, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. My people have lived in the Christian lands for over 1,000 years. So I don't know what else they would look like. My ancestors in the shtetl lived lives that were more like those of Polish peasants in many significant ways than like those of my Yemenite cousins, notwithstanding the ethnic similarity. So I think it is a European norm, which for all its brutality, did I think produce a manageable model for a pluralistic, tolerant society. That means you can be a Muslim and you can stand on a soapbox in Hyde Park or on a Riverside Park and bark all you want about how everyone who isn't going to believe in Islam is an infidel. You're entitled to that opinion. Jews who are offended by Christians, who express their love for their religion and the gods that they worship, or the God that they worship, and their belief that Jews are mistaken and maybe even damned or darned for their beliefs. I couldn't care less. That's their religion. That's what they believe. I'm not the least bit threatened by it because it's not what I believe in. Fine. But you can't have a crusade and you can't have a jihad. That's how it's got to be. And that's got to start on our sort of miniature models of life that are the college campuses. Uh, it, we're not there. We're completely inverted from there. When we demonstrate that we can push back in those little worlds, then we can push back in the real world, and that is, I guess, job one.
Yeah. Can we stipulate that college, administrators are cowards?
They are not only cowards, but they tend to be mediocre figures.
Right. There's a fabulous book. I had on the author Scott Johnston, who we didn't coincide. I think he's a few years younger than me, at Yale, and he wrote the book called Campus Land, which I highly value.
My metaphor, I think, it sounds like I was not the first one to think of that. That the campuses. I mean, look. I assume you read God and Man at Yale.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a foundational book in the conservative canon, and Buckley was wrestling with something that he turned out. Growing up as a conservative in this, in the 70s and 80s, all the things that were threatened and all the things that were poo-pooed all came true. They're all true now. Everything that conservatives warned about. And yes, there is something about the campus. I think it's an apt, device to say, is that our future? Is this a microcosm of our society? And that's not because the vast majority of people are affected by what happens at Princeton and Yale directly. They're not. But these are the elites. I'm not describing you and I as elites as such, but in a way we are. We're having this discussion. We're privileged to be able to have this discussion. Regardless of what you and I say, we'll both be able to feed our families, and after this episode is uploaded. And some people will even listen to us. So we're influential in that regard. And part of it is because we had the privilege of great educations. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but
No, that's fine. I just think that the cowards, they are willing to go. So there's two different. There's a very obscure definition of schooling, which is what fish do. Okay, so fish school, and I don't know why they call that, but basically, I love this metaphor. I haven't let go of it all through COVID and everything like that. And I actually have it in one of my books to be published. But fish school, they follow each other somehow. They're all moving in the same direction. They I don't know whether it's scent or visual or some pheromonic thing that they pass around. Anyway, they all move one direction and then they all move the other direction. And maybe this is a great way to keep the fish together so they can breed and they know each other, so forth. So they're schooling. It is an interesting phenomenon for our professorial class that they are schooling in the same way. They're not schooling. I'm not sure what the root word of school is. I mean, we have it, I go to shul, which I assume is the same word. So it's a place of learning, ostensibly. Now, the fish aren't doing much learning. They never even get to know their parents. I don't think they have much, imprinting going on because they're in the water and, some sperm flies over some eggs and then there's a new fish. And I don't even know how they know who they are, let alone get to school. So it's a very complicated thing, but I think most of it's kind of happening in the primitive part of a primitive brain. But I think that they can be threatened. I think right now they're threatened by their own people. I think they worry about demonstrations, and I think they put too much into that, and they don't really have the means of having recourse because they've abandoned the concept of whatever the school form of extradition is.
And those are the ones who are reading the room. There, I'll grant you. I don't think it's as true with foreign countries as such. I think that we tend to put an American framework into the way other countries look at things that is probably inappropriate. But I certainly agree that that institutions like that, because these tend to be mediocre and easily frightened people who are in positions of extraordinary privilege, and don't want to do anything to endanger the good lives that they have built. The same thing with a scumbag like Chuck Schumer. I mean, here's a guy who for years would barge his way into Jewish organizational, dinners, insist, in New York, insist on being given an opportunity to extend his greetings from the podium. And he would say, "I'm the Schumer Yisrael." Schumer actually means someone who works with fat and rendering. But he would make a play on the word shomer, which is a Hebrew word for guardian, right? So he said, I'm the Shomer Yisrael, but he didn't mean the Jewish people. He meant the state of Israel, because in his infantile brain, the best way to ingratiate yourself with all Jews is to say, I'm pro-Israel. So what? That's not of interest. That's not really of great interest to him. What's the main thing that's of interest to him is being reelected forever. And since the voters in New York that support him insist that he support Israel, then that's what he does. But did he stop the Iran deal under Obama? No. Did he have the power to do so? Yes. So he's worthless. And but in each sector, you do have these people who capture these a perch, and yes, they follow the school, they swim with the current. And going back to my earlier point about leadership, I don't know I don't think Donald Trump, frankly, is that leader, because he's divisive. It's not always his fault that he's divisive, but he's divisive as hell. So I don't,
Well, I think he is that leader, insofar as there is one. Perfect being the enemy of the good and all that. If there's a better one out there, fine. I would, if I were engineering a Donald Trump or something like that, I might put in a tincture of this, that differently. But that we don't really have that liberty. And sometimes one's greatest faults are one's greatest strengths. His ability to slough things off, water off a duck's back, is an incredible talent. I belong to an athletic squash and tennis club, and when in the 2016 run up, that tape that had been they've been holding on to for like an 18 months, Hollywood Express or something like that, tape where Mr. Trump said some kind of schoolyard stuff and boasting and boisterous, whatever. There were some guys in the club who were just like almost literally dancing, and they were certainly yelling with glee. They were whooping. They weren't quite doing the Palestinian yell, but that Trump was dead. They had skewered him and so forth. And he went up to the debate like the next day or something like that. Nothing. It was nothing. It was nothing.
I agree with you that I think he has many of the personal qualities. Listen. Right now, I don't see anyone. I'll grant you, I don't see anyone else. And what he will do if given the opportunity, and if he doesn't make the same mistakes, and they were bad ones that he made in his first term of trusting the wrong people and hiring the wrong people, he does know how to stick to his guns, and he has internalized not being part of the school, not being part of the group. And that's part of what he is, and that is a rare quality in and of itself. Because if you do have someone in that position who is prepared to say, "I'm going to enforce the law," like Ronald Reagan did when he fired the striking air controllers, that was something that was politically impossible for anyone else to fathom to do. It just was unbelievable. How could that actually be happening? But Reagan did it, and for all his failures and compromises and mistakes that he made, that is indeed a rare quality. So I'll grant you that, Randall.
Fair enough. So how does one? You're an attorney, correct?
I am.
So the joke is that it's only 99% of attorneys that give the other ones a bad name. But I've got a lot of attorney jokes. My dad was an attorney, so I admire them. But it's not to say that I don't have my share of jokes about them. But so let's put on aside from your kippa, let's put on your lawyer cap and ask how to provide a reasonable ballast to universities, since that seems to be part of our topic here, to ensure freedoms. Isn't that part of their pact? If I get on an airplane, pay a few $100 to go to Cleveland or something like that, it's incumbent for that flight, the owners of that flight, to keep me reasonably safe. And they do that. They check for box cutters and I don't know, all kinds of items and so forth. They want me to keep to my seat. They don't want me to smoke a cigarette, and so forth. And I get off the flight, I can mill about. I'm not their problem anymore, vice versa. Colleges cost substantially more. And they get government funding on top of it all. They get Pell grants and this grant and that grant, aside from all the research funding and all this kind of stuff. I don't think we have a willing administration currently on a federal level, but on a state-by-state basis potentially, and or on a legal, say lawfare kind of basis. Are there any things happening on this end, and do you have any creative legal concepts for that?
Well, there is. You're right. There are things happening. I mean, in the legislatures, first of all, a lot of this contagion came in through the state university systems. I think that the elite schools were really standing up to this, both in terms of academics and campus environment, for a very long time. But the state schools, which are dominant, which are giant, and which are, funded by the state, there's a lot the legislatures can and should do with placing conditions on continued funding of a lot of programs that are the home bases of a lot of this moral and cultural subversion that we're witnessing. I do think that it would be entirely appropriate. In fact, it would be inappropriate not to re-examine what we consider to be a not-for-profit. It's ridiculous that schools with tens of billions of dollars that pay in the bank, and which pay administrators multi-million, and football coaches sometimes multi-million-dollar salaries, are treated as nonprofits. The fact that there is no profit earned by a shareholder obscures the fact that there's a great deal of profit earned by the cadre that, for all intents and purposes, owns and operates these institutions for their benefit. There's no reason that these endowments should continue to be untouchable. There are a lot of ways that we can deal with that, and I think we should deal with that. We need to also have an immigration policy and to enforce it. Almost every immigration visa, let's talk about legal immigration first, has requirements. They need to be enforced. You can't come to this country under a visa and support terrorist organizations. We're kind of running out of time, but I do think there are legal ways. The problem with them is the political willingness to enact them on the legislative side, and also the utter sense of arbitrariness on the judiciary side. Judges basically rule. They do whatever they want. They're not accountable. I don't know how I would go about changing that, because I do think I think there's a lot to be said for lifetime tenure, but give me till our next chat, and maybe I'll come up with a.
Well, would you come back on again? Because I enjoyed talking.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, sure, I would. Yeah, I'm easy. Anything rather than do my.
I will double your stipend on the next visit.
Right. I appreciate it.
I'm just going to end with a quick self-promotion here. I do have. Let's see if I can find it here. Oops. I'm going to have trouble with it. Maybe I'm not going to be able to pull it up right this second.
Yeah, you can fold it in later.
Yeah. Anyway, I have a book called Overturning Zika. It is about the last great pandemic. It disappeared. It was on Amazon. It's Overturning Zika. So if you want to help support my videocast, you can go buy that. It's even better if you read it. And even better than that, if you comment on it and so forth, pass it along. There's a lot of instructional material there. It happened elsewhere for the most part, but our own Dr. Fauci, you might remember that name, when he basically stole from writ large cancer, diabetes, other kinds of research monies in order to plow it into Zika, and basically force the hand of our Congress to, make $1 billion fund for Zika, which was not a U.S. problem at all. And it's probably this has disappeared completely. It had disappeared by the time he did this, even in mid 2016. And probably the original science was not there. There is Zika. It's a real virus. And there is microcephaly, which is a real but very rare problem of congenital childbirth issues. And it just so happens that one doesn't cause the other. How do we know that? It hasn't recurred anywhere on Earth. It never recurred even in Brazil. It didn't occur in Venezuela and Colombia, that bad first panic year, and so forth. So there's a lot of instruction there. They're coming out with a vaccine. Wasn't warp speed. And so I give Donald Trump credit for that. I don't agree with everything that happened with the vaccine, but it was warp speed, relatively speaking. And here we're approaching nearly a decade after Zika microcephaly. And there's been no vaccine, but there will be one shortly. And they're going to be putting it out and probably mandating it around the world by WHO for 1 billion people who don't need to take that. And then they're going to declare victory. That's my little conspiracy theory for the world, unrelated to our topics at hand. The bigger things at hand.
Oh, it's related. It's related. It just does. We don't have time to connect the dots, but they are definitely related.
So how can people follow you and or help you, and how let us know what we can kind of do or mobilize to help get better campuses basically.
Well, I'm at roncoleman.com. Not at Ron Coleman. I do have a website at roncoleman.com, which is basically my landing site where you can find everything. You can also find it though on X, where I have a lot of followers. I have a podcast, Culmination, which is available on all the usual platforms. But start out by following me on Twitter, and then I'll publish links to all the other good stuff. Okay. And I really appreciate your having me on.
Well, that's lovely. I'll send you a copy of the Zika book. I think it's frankly one of the more fascinating things I ever came across. I'm not as an infectious disease guy. I've never seen a case of Zika. I've never seen a case of microcephaly. Never been to Brazil, but I was sitting on wherever I sit usually, and came upon this, and I was just mystified that nobody had really pointed out that the thing disappeared. It's kind of the emperor's new clothes, and I think there's kind of I don't want to use the cabal word, but certainly people are entrenched in getting money. They don't necessarily want to point out that they should not be getting it anymore because the thing that they got it for doesn't really, have all that import.
Well, it's kind of like white, collecting money against hate, and then spending it on looking for white nationalists and parents at board meetings, and ignoring what's going on in the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE and the like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they do that because they are scared. I think, if mothers at school boards started, bombing things, they would have a different import. They would, unfortunately, like I said, terror works. Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. Mishal, whatever his name is, the Hamas guy, apparently multi-billionaire. It's a very, very lucrative proposition,
That's right.
And that is how we school. We school, we listen, we read and all that kind of stuff, but if somebody wants to blow us up, we're like, oh, I'm going to, have to pay attention to that. Anyway, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Let's talk again soon.
I appreciate your open candor. Thank you for coming.
All right. All the best. So long.